So this is, I believe, episode 6 in our Let's Talk Recruiting series. Today's topic is 5 misunderstood facts about recruiting. And we have people from across the country join us today. We have John Kempe out of Denver. We have David Wardwell out of Portland. And we have Heather Malone out of New York City. And Gary Michael out of the Los Angeles, same area where I am out of. And it's a beautiful day out here. It makes it hard to stay in. So again, these sessions are kind of a conversational piece. If any of the attendees have any questions as we go, I am keeping track of the chat area. So if you have anything in there, please put it in there and we'll get it into the conversation. But otherwise than that, we're going to sort of jump right into it. Each of us have a topic around, or an item around this topic, and we'll just sort of do a round robin and have a conversation around it. So with that said, John, I'm going to sort of jump it over to you to start off with your highlighted area.
Sure thing. And I'll start with this. I'm jealous that it's a nice day where you are. It's snowing where I am. So it makes it a little easier to stay inside. But the thing that I wanted to talk about is recruiting and sales. People often say, hey, they're the same. And that's not exactly true. And so I wanted to sort of bust that myth. They share a lot of the same motions. Obviously, you are kind of going through a sales process when you're recruiting someone to a new job, whether you're a contingent recruiter, a retained recruiter, or even an internal recruiter. It's all, it's a very similar motion to a sales motion. But there are some pretty key differences. And this COVID-19 thing sort of illustrates some of those. If you're a salesperson, you want to get out there and sell as much of your company's product as you possibly can. I think that's what the executive team at most companies would tell you is, hey, go out and sell as much as you can. And if you beat your quota, that's amazing. In fact, if you double or triple your quota, good for you, and we're going to reward you. And that's because everything that you do brings money into the company. And recruiting, like I said, similar motion, but every time we do something well as recruiters, the company spends money. And we don't have, we may have a quota that we are sort of held to and expected to achieve, but there's probably also a do not exceed number that people are thinking about. Don't hire more than this. We can't pay those people, or we don't have enough work for them to do. And so I always like to sort of dig into that when I hear people say it is, recruiting and sales are the same. You'll hear, oh, they're so similar. And there are some similarities for sure. But from a bird's eye view, they're pretty different. And so I thought that would be an interesting way to kind of kick the conversation off, because I know there's a lot of misunderstood things about recruiting. And I thought that might be an interesting one to sort of highlight. So I'm sure we'll get into that more maybe, but yeah, that's my soapbox for today.
Let me throw this one back at you, John, sort of a question and a comment. So I started off recruiting third party, been in corporate recruiting for many, many years now. But in agency recruiting, you're selling a lot more, right? You are kind of selling your candidates and your product against another competitor's products, especially if you're doing a contingent search. You don't want all that work to go for nothing. So to me, it was like the motivator was there. It's crystal clear, right? It was commission. Going from agency to corporate recruiting, I've been consulting, so I got the opportunity to go into a lot of different companies and see how they run their recruiting programs. My thing was like, how do y'all stay motivated? Because it's a grind. Right? It's a lot of losses, win. Losses, win. So that motivation piece. So for sales, easy, money. With not having a commission check, because I've only been at one place where placements for a corporate recruiter, it really wasn't placements, it was diversity of pipeline, was part of their annual bonus. Outside of that, I've never seen performance relate directly back to pay in a corporate area. So around motivation, what do you think are some good ways for corporate recruiters to stay motivated?
It's a really interesting question. And I sort of wrote this topic and I thought about it. And then, a couple hours before we jumped on the Zoom, I thought, this isn't exactly true for contingent recruiters. Maybe I need to adjust my answer here, but you're right. And one of the myths that I try to dispel this myth very often internally when people are saying, oh, recruiting and sales are so similar. And my answer to them is always, well, then why don't you pay me like a salesperson? If they're so similar, then why don't we get commission checks or bonuses or pay for performance type sort of incentives? And they never have a good answer to that. So how do you stay motivated? For me, I'm lucky to work in a company where when I hire people, they end up coming and joining the company, and I get to meet them and see them and be part of their, career journey at Gusto. And so the incentive to sort of help people and do right by them, I think is a motivator for me. And I think for a lot of internal recruiters, it can be. But it's a great question, and I'd be open to hearing what other people have to say or think about it. Does anyone else have ideas on this sort of topic around motivation for internal recruiters?
So I will say that, I'm a recruiter who's married to a salesperson, and I think our motivations are very different. He's all about, I don't care what I'm selling as long as I close the deal and make the money. And for me, it's much more of a personal feel. I care that I put the right person in the right seat, and I care about their career path, and that's the reward for me. It's much more fulfilling to know that you made a difference in somebody's life. Not that I wouldn't mind the paycheck if they wanted to pay me like how they pay him, that'd be great. But, that's a whole other can of worms. But I do think that, I want to say that recruiters are a little bit more altruistic, which is maybe, a naive thing to say, but I think that our rewards are a little bit more on the human compassion scale.
Yeah, I think if you love what your company does, whatever product or service it is, that's probably like the motivator. I've seen some very passionate recruiters in biotech, right? They're trying to cure cancer or help cure cancer. I've seen some other people where it is just a time clock where, take it or leave it, whatever the product is. But yeah, so picking that company that you recruit for, I think is probably like the best motivator that I've seen. Again, Heather, to your point, it's like you want your recruiters to be kind of hard driven and get it done type mentality, because that's what it takes a lot. But then it's like that, well, hey, you got to do a lot of social work on the side, dealing with candidates, a psychologist dealing with your hiring managers. So it's like, what is the makeup? What is the recipe for a corporate recruiter? I don't know. It's either like you like it and you're into it, or you're not. I haven't seen some type of profile that gets you in there. And I kind of bring up that profile because going back again to that agency where I started, we took a psych test, and that was, did you get hired or not? Did you match the profile of the two best recruiters in the company? And it's like, okay, that's kind of interesting, but okay. And then you just go from there. But corporate recruiting, there's all different types of personalities. It seems you can't pin anybody to the wallet pretty easy. Any other? Oh, go ahead, John.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's interesting. You talked about sort of altruism. The purpose of any business or company or entity at all is really to serve customers of some kind, right? It could be, people who are buying your product, people who are using your services. There's always some kind of end user. And if we as a business, as a company, get bigger, get better at what we do, then that's going to serve everyone over the long term. And so the short-term incentive of a sales, hey, I made the deal, I closed the sale, I get the check, is not quite the same. But over the long term, I think if you can increase this, the status of the business that you work for by serving customers better, whatever that means for your business, over the long term, you're gonna see returns on that effort. And so I don't think of it as altruism so much as I think of it as maybe delayed gratification. You just have to wait a little bit longer for the payoff rather than a commission check.
So, hey, David, let's move to your item, because I think your item kind of fits well in with where we're heading in this conversation. What is your item that you wanted to highlight?
Okay. My name's Dave Wardwell. I'm with WebMD, and I recruit this is something you had asked us to do, Sean, I was remembering. I do editorial, technology, product, and project management across the company. I've been recruiting since '99. I entered in the .com boom as an agency recruiter. So I was a headhunter for around 10 years, and then on the company side for around 10 years. So a little over 10 years now. My question is, or my misconception about recruiting is, usually as a internal recruiter, you ever come into an office or come into a meeting room and all of your coworkers who aren't in recruiting would say, "Uh-oh, HR's here." And you're going, what? And I always go ahead and say, time out. Recruiting is not the same thing as HR. And I think a lot of times recruiting is embedded within the HR organization. HR is a part of, and really kind of depends on the company makeup, right? What the executive leadership expects from human resources and how human resources and HR partner or are integrated. So a lot of times, and just a caveat, I've only worked in organizations where recruiting as an internal recruiter is somewhat managed or focused similar or built similarly as an agency recruiting desk. So a caveat there is a bit of a difference in how I have pursued recruiting opportunities from a standpoint of what really excites me. Maybe that kind of goes a little bit with John's, or Sean, your question about what motivates you. One of the things I look at is recruiting is really about identifying and bringing in the best talent into an organization. HR doesn't focus on that. HR so basically recruiting, we bring in the talent, we help bring in the talent, we support the hiring managers and the headcount, support and the overall roadmap of the kind of talent that we want to bring in our organization. And then you hand that baton off to HR. HR helps the management, again, go ahead and manage that talent, whether they manage them into other parts of the organization through promotion, just through natural growth or the trajectory of their career, or they sometimes have to manage those new employees out of the organization. So a lot of times when I hear that comment is like, uh-oh, HR's here, that's how sometimes people view HR, as they kind of view him as the boogeyman or Catbert from the Dilbert, the Dilbert comics, the evil HR. And that's not the case. We obviously partner with human resources day in and day out, but our motivation and our focus and our core is to help our managers and our teams not get burned out because they don't have enough staff, or they don't have the right talent, or they don't have the right skill set in-house. We are there to go ahead and support them. We're there to go ahead and help manage candidates into the organization. We really don't manage candidates once they're here, and we don't manage them out.
David, let me ask you a question around like when the recruiting process is going on to bring in those employees and the relationship between the recruiter and the HR business partner, and then kind of working together. I've seen it be a lot of friction, and I've seen it be smooth. But whenever it's like trying to get, when you see a staffing leader come in and trying to get the recruiting program on track and on point, it's always like, let's define and establish the rules. They'll throw in the SLAs. I hate it when you got to throw in the SLAs to get the job done like that between HR, business partner, and the recruiter. Do you have any thoughts around? Yeah, I agree. There is a distinction between the two, but yep, you got to work together. Sometimes it's more hands-on, sometimes it's more hands-off. I've never seen a recruiter unhappy when it was a hands-off from the HR business partner where they could just own it and go forward. Mm-hmm. But do you have any experiences around that distinct relationship between those two roles?
I mean, I think being able to identify the distinction between those two is really key. If there is, again, kind of going back to my original comment, if the organization really kind of puts a hierarchy that HR is over recruiting, you most likely will have some kind of friction if you as a recruiter are trying to manage your relationship around expectations with the hiring manager or with the process. If HR is coming in and they don't want to go ahead and allow your freedom to go ahead and manage it, because this is one of the big things that I learned years ago. I was with a very large international OEM, and basically I went to a where we had our applicant tracking system, and I sat down with the CEO of our global applicant tracking system. We were in 33 different countries around the world, and I asked him, I was like, so do we ever think we're going to have an ATS and an HRAS blended together? And he goes, they're very different organizations. HR has very set rules, and recruiting is very flexible. You have to be a flexible organization from a recruiting standpoint. And so if there's too much blending of HR and recruiting, you're going to have a little bit of that rigidity come into recruiting, and that is going to, unfortunately, in my experience, hamstring your recruitment and prevent you from really having that flexibility. I often tell my hiring managers, because they always say, what rules do I have to follow around recruiting? And I always usually say, don't do anything illegal. Outside of that, flexibility is probably one of your biggest tools in your toolbox to go ahead and really bring in great. The landscape is often changing. I mean, WebMD is kind of a unique organization. We're in advertising, but we're also in technology. So we often are looking for talent from technology companies. We can't compete with Google. We can't compete with Intel. We can't compete with Facebook. On a comp scale with our technology people, we can compete in different areas, but we also can't compete with advertising agencies. But we also have a lot better work-life balance. So the thing is, when you're looking at different organizations, you have to be really flexible and creative from a recruitment standpoint. And if you have that rigidity kind of breeding into the HR or the recruiting organization from HR, you're really gonna get limited. And if you have some partnership between that HR business partner and recruitment, I think you have if they back you and support you and help you, I think manage the expectations around the hiring managers and making sure that everything is going smoothly and the momentum and the progress is moving forward. I think that's where I see that beautiful blend work well together. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Give me a quick answer. Does WebMD have that blended?
Yeah.
Perfect.
We actually have a really good, we have some awesome HR business partners here. Some of the best ones I've worked with in my career. So it's been a great blend. They back us, they support us, but we also support them, and we work well together. So
excellent. Yeah, I didn't try to set you up there. I figured the way you were speaking about it, you guys had it. So I thought it was a safe question. All right. Does anybody want to comment on anything that David said? All right, so let's go, Heather. Let's kind of jump over to your item, and I hope I didn't step on it before, but I'll leave you to it.
Oh, no, you're fine. I did see that Megan had a question about staying motivated during slow hiring and hiring freezes. And we're in a hiring freeze now, so I thought I would, just touch on that for a little bit. So, I've found that staying motivated is still connecting with people in my pipeline, people that were kind of close to the end of the process, and just keeping them updated, having conversations. I'm still talking to some of our interns that, may or may not have an internship. We're not sure yet, but that has helped me to sort of also get a pulse for what's actually going on in the market, and keeping me connected without feeling like, oh my gosh, they're going to, turn the spigot back on and it's going to be a fire hose at me, just to keep everybody kind of not dragging them along, but kind of touching base and keeping track of people. And what motivates me too is also trying to follow the market trends. And, I'm in insurance, so we're trying to track, who's still hiring, how many of our competitors, how many jobs do they have posted? Are we seeing in the news, these are the layoffs that are happening, and that's motivating my TA team to help, because that's strategic communication that goes right to the top and is really valued right now. So there's that. My topic though was that I wanted to talk about kind of the misconceptions about all recruiters were all the same. I think that there's really a bunch of different recruiters out there. So there's retained recruiters at a search firm where, if you wanted to hire your next C-level executive, you're going to go pay them a six-figure sum to go out and do their search, and you're going to sit back and just wait for them to show up with a candidate to walk in the door. And I think that's a different sort of search than a lot of people are aware of. Then there's the contingent recruiting, which is the agency recruiting that I think all of us are pretty familiar with. They take their 20% fee and find you your person. If you hire them, you pay them, maybe four figures, maybe sometimes five, depends. And four figures if you're lucky, I guess I should say. And then the corporate recruiters, which are the internal recruiters who, they don't work on a contingent basis. They don't earn a typical commission for each of their hire. So a lot of this is different in how they're paid. I've also worked as a managed service partner, so being on site at a client, but I'm paid through a staffing agency. And I think that's sort of a different model. And then you kind of are the manager for all of these contingent recruiters to come into this company that you're on site for. So I think really it's just a lot of volume of business is different for these different levels of recruiters. And so it's also a difference in insight to the organization. So obviously, if you're a corporate recruiter, you know the ins and outs, you know the personalities of the managers, you know the type of person that this manager wants to hire, whereas a contingent recruiter may not know that. Retained recruiters, it doesn't matter how much you pay them, they still may not know exactly your corporate culture. So just wanted to kind of, throw that out there, that there are different types of recruiters and different ways that we work and different ways that we're all paid.
Got it. Yep. Has everybody, have you been 100% corporate recruiter in your career? Or have you ever worked third party?
I've done all three.
Yep. Same.
Yep.
Yeah, it's years ago, when I did consulting for years ago, what I would do is go into companies and build out strategic sourcing programs, basically real recruiting, in my opinion, where you're going out and you're target people. It's not processing resumes with ATS, but it's strictly outbound recruiting. And whenever I go into a place, I'd always, they throw me into the room with all the recruiters, and recruiters, if you don't know what you're doing, they're going to chew you apart. I would always ask the question, who's had third-party experience? And those people always caught on a lot quicker to this definition of recruiting and outbound recruiting versus somebody who's only just had 100% corporate recruiting. Not to say that you can't be a great corporate recruiter by just having that experience, but it was always sort of the mindset was there if they've had a little bit of that third party. It's a brutal world. I think a lot of people do their time in third party and then get into corporate recruiting because we get into the bigger picture things, and there's no cutthroat and all that craziness that goes on in third party. But I always like to see that who's had all those experiences on that. Anybody else want to comment on Heather's item? All right, Gary, let's jump over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll piggyback on what you said a little bit about third party. I've done third party twice in my career, and I've come to realize about 7-8 years ago, not good at it. It's not my jam. I'm not good at it, and I need to be in the corporate space. That being said, I would say that when I look for people to join my team, I want someone who has that third-party experience, because you learn how to hustle, and you learn how to take a very broad job description and how to close it all the way through. But you might be looking for something different in your career. So I think the third-party experience is extremely valuable. And I always look for that in someone's background. And then also wanting to know why you want to make the changeover from third party to the corporate side. That then kind of parallels into my topic, which was hiring managers think that we just post a job and wait. And in different organizations that I've worked in, I've had hiring managers come in the office on Friday and say, hey, I want to post this job. And then Monday morning at 9:00 say, do you have anyone? Did anything happen? Or thinking that we just kind of look through our ATS and just wait. And so one of the things that we try to be very upfront about, and I did mention this before, I work for Virgin Orbit here in Los Angeles, is that training our hiring managers that, number one, every rec is going to be different. Some are going to be easier or harder to fill, but that once we post it, that's just the first step. there are a series of other steps that we go out and to find talent. And you have to trust us to be the professionals to go out there to screen and find the right candidates. And this is always a fine line with the hiring manager of saying, I don't need you to tell me what to do. I know how to do my job. But I need you to understand, like, I need a little bit of time, because if I post it on Friday, I'm not going to have candidates for you by Monday. Here's the kicker. They might come in on Monday and say, oh, well, this third-party agency came out to me and they gave me 15 candidates right away. And you're like, that's great. I can appreciate that. However, here's how our process and our system works too. So for me, it's always been a piece of training our hiring managers again and again and again of how the process works. I think earlier in my career, I would get very frustrated when that would happen. And I took that as an opportunity to come back and say, here's how the recruiting piece works, right? You could go to an agency, you could go in-house. Where do you want to spend your dollars? Where do you want to spend your budget at? And where's the balance going to be? 9 times out of 10, it's usually been, if you want to hire this candidate that came to you from a third party, it's going to be $20,000 for you. It's going to be $17,000. Or you could go with our route and we could be looking for talent because this rec's only been open for, let's say, 5 days. And so being able to balance and measure that out, sometimes it's a challenge. I know sometimes at Virgin, we back into that a lot, being a startup, having a great brand, putting a rocket into space. We get hit all the time with great resumes from third party. But then our hiring managers, we need to talk to them about the sourcing piece of it, the cold calling piece of it, and that it takes time. We hire a large amount of rocket scientists, right? There's only so many propulsion engineers in the country that want to live in Los Angeles and come work for our program. So we have to go out and hunt and find those people. So to Heather's point of going out and keeping your pipeline warm, our business is all pipeline. And so we've got to reach out to people 4 months from now and tell them what we're doing and what we're looking for. And do you want to be a part of it and following what's happening in the news? So it's all those pieces. What I enjoy the most about the hiring manager experience, though, is being able to sit them down for 15 minutes over a cup of coffee and just explain, here's what's going to happen with your rec. And we're going to do our part, not so much in an SLA conversation, but here's our part, here's your part to help us be successful. We always say, if we email you with information, I need a response back because I can't move forward until you tell me. And they're like, oh, I had no idea. And we get stuck in the cycle sometimes of just thinking, well, you should know that. When I email you, I need a response. And they're like, we're not the number one thought on their mind until they want an update on the rec. And then it's like, we're scrambling. I tell my team, communication is key. Over communicate every single time. So then when we do get pinged and say, it's been 5 days, nothing's happened with my rec, you can go, no, a lot has happened with your rec. Here you go. And so it's that forever cycle. And I think once we get it right 1, 2, and 3 times, then our hiring manager is like, all right, recruiting team's got it, go. I may not talk to you for a week, but I know that you're working my rec. That's been my experience, and that's something that we have to do time and time again to make sure that our managers know that not every rec is created equally, and we are grinding on every rec equally. We all know that there are times where certain recs take certain priorities. I tell my team, if you're carrying 20, 25 recs, you've got to balance your workload. You know the hiring managers who can kind of wait a little bit, the ones who are going to be yelling and shouting, the ones who are going to be calling me Monday morning saying, what the heck is going on? So it's that forever cycle. That goes anywhere from our CEO when I fill recs for him to some of our other newer managers or directors who don't really understand it, even though they've been in business for a very long time. And so we at Orbit always kind of say like, hey, you're putting a rocket together. I understand that. I'm going to find you the talent, but I need a little bit of time to do that and be respectful about it.
Hey, Gary, are you recruiters on your team? Are they all full life cycle, or do you have dedicated sourcers on your team?
I've got 2 sourcers and two full cycle.
Oh, well, you got a small. I thought you'd have a much larger team than that, to tell you the truth, given the task at hand with the type of talent that you're looking for.
And I'll tell you what, our sourcers are the backbone of the backbone of the deal. Being able to find that literally that 2% of the population who can do what we need them to do, they're out there hunting all day long, all hours of the day.
Yeah, in my experience, when you do have that deep skill set of people where there's, hey, there just simply aren't a lot of people in the world that do this type of stuff, to your point. If you don't have dedicated sourcers and your recruiters have to do full life cycle on recruits, it's kind of a death sentence for your team. They'll always be scrambling. So dedicated sourcers are a must have. I've also seen where we've done pilots where it wasn't for that, I'll call it that deep skill set. It was more of a commodity type skill set, for lack of better words, where we put in kind of an agency model within a corporate where this recruiter only focused on the talent and these two recruiters are supported by that person and only focused on the manager, right? That worked really well too. So I always look at full life cycle recruiters when you have to juggle different balls and then you have a mind shift over here, then you got a mind shift over here. Creating that rhythm and flow, I just think it's really, really hard for full life cycle recruiters, but it's kind of the typical model. Probably a budgetary decision was in there somewhere. Interesting. Does anybody want to comment on Gary's item?
Amen, brother.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah. All right.
True.
So my item that I'm going to throw in there is kind of from a different perspective. It's kind of from the candidate's perspective. So my misunderstood fact, and maybe not so about recruiting, but hiring, is when candidates look at, when they apply for a job, they think it's a matching game. Their resume against the rec. Hey, I can do that job. Why am I not getting the job? Or why am I not even get called? And what I tell people, it's not a matching game. It's a competition. And think of it as the marathon race. Whenever you start like the Boston Marathon, everybody go. And thousands of people are running at the same time. And to me, that's the process of a rec. To Gary, this probably doesn't apply to some of yours because it is such a high-end type of deal. But for all your corporate positions, marketing positions, where it is, hey, I can do it. Why am I not getting calls back? It's like I have a daughter in the workforce, and I told her it's not whether you can do it, it's about how well you can do it better than the other person. So the analogy I use is it's a race, it's a competition. Every job you apply to is a competition. It's not about you doing the job, it's about you standing out and how well can you do it in the other person. And then aside from that, not too many people outside of recruiting know recruiting, so it's about rec load. And the honest truth is they may have never even looked at your resume. If you're finding out that the job was the only communication you're getting back is when the rec has been closed, they just have a chance to even look at your resume. So always take a pause and try and work your angle in or on the side when trying to get at a company that you really want to. But that's sort of my misconception is it's not whether you can do the job. It's about how much better you can do it than everybody else and figuring out that piece of it. And any comments on that item? I know we're at the half hour and I do want to cover a couple questions that came in from the chat session.
I was about to give a shout out to Heather, who's holding it down in the chat, answering some of those questions. So
I didn't want them to go unanswered if we ended at 30 after.
Totally.
Heather, what do you got in the chat session since you're monitoring that? Thank you for that.
Well, I don't know if I'm monitoring it, but so Tazrina says, one of the biggest concerns is how do we prove to the business that we're an essential part of the business right now? Apart from pipelining, what can internal recruiters do to show value? So, I know we touched on that a little bit before about, I have our TA team doing like market reports and industry reports, layoffs, hires for our competition. We've also repurposed some of our internal recruiters to be HR corporate communications. There's a lot more communications that need to happen in a crisis time. So we're we've turned some of our recruiters into marketers kind of. We've, done a few different things, but that's my answer. So you all can tackle it from here.
Heather, on that, or on the marketing piece, are your people creating tangible items? By that, okay, excellent. Because I was going to say, show something back, and whether it's a PDF or a deck or something like that. So when everything starts up again, you're ready to go.
PDFs, deck, things that are going on the intranet, things that are going out company-wide communication platforms. We're doing a whole charity thing, raising money, and they're all working on that too. So we've got 20 projects in the hopper.
Excellent.
I think on that end too, kind of in the crisis, I've been telling my team, stay in touch with your managers. They may not be responding back to you because they're worrying about some other things, but keep showing them your pipeline. Keep showing them that you're in this, you're working, and you're going to be supporting their business, because when the faucet turns back on, it's either going to be a slow drip or it's going to be a fire hose. You got And so keep loading full of information. And if you don't have a resume, just if you have a profile, but stay in touch. I said, out of sight, out of mind's not good in our business, right? We got to be at the forefront of it all. And they may not respond. That's okay, but don't get tackled by that. Just keep filling up that pipeline, because at some point in time, they're going to come back and go, okay, we're ready. What do you got? And have your 1, 2, 3s, and 4s ready to go. And it's okay to say, I haven't screened them, but I found their profile. Okay, cool. We've got something to work with. Just be ready to answer any questions, because when the shift changes, it's going to change fast.
It's going to be real interesting, right? Fingers crossed, hoping it happens more sooner than later. But when the switch gets turned back on again, it's going to be real interesting to see how it goes. That light in the end of the tunnel, I think, is going to be a really bright light, and it's going to be right in your face. And hey, recruiters, everybody that got, you know how recruiting is when nobody's hiring, we're kind of the first to go, or the last thought, and then, okay, we need to hire again. And it's, what do you mean? What have you been doing? It should be ready to go, and everything like that, to your point, Gary. So yeah, it should be real interesting. I'm sorry, anybody else?
Another thing I've asked, I manage a really small team here at Gusto, and we mostly recruit engineers, software engineers. I didn't mention that at the beginning, so I'll say it now. And another thing I've asked some of my team to do is, hey, think about 6 months ago. Try and go back to 6 months ago and think about some of the things in our process you thought were broken or you thought could be fixed back then, things that annoyed you and got on your nerves, and maybe ask your stakeholders what those things were too. Now is a time when you can potentially focus on re-architecting some of that stuff. And kind of to circle all the way back to my original point about sales and recruiting not being the same. I think one of the skill sets that you get in internal recruiting, or that you have to nurture in internal recruiting, corporate recruiting, is you become a little bit of a project manager. You got to sprinkle some process management skills on those sales fundamentals that you get in that third party environment. And now's a perfect time to flex some of those muscles and really, really think about your process. How can it be improved? What could we do better when the fire hose turns on than what we were doing 6 months ago? You've never had a better opportunity to fix some of that stuff than a time like right now. So that's one thing I've been saying and sort of yelling from the rooftops a lot internally.
Has anybody seen an uptick in applicants around like your like, let's say, software developers or software engineers? Company I'm working with now, we haven't around software developers. It's the same.
We've seen a huge uptick at WebMD. Maybe that's because WebMD is probably getting slammed because we're always on the news now. But to a great extent, we're seeing a huge uptick on candidates, all of our jobs across the board. But the interesting thing is people are not relaxing their comp expectations, because I think everybody is thinking this is going to be short-lived. So they don't want to go ahead and take too much of a haircut from what they were currently making. Therefore, their comp expectations are still pretty high. And that's what the market's been. People have been asking for quite a bit more money. But yeah, we've seen a considerable uptick, especially since like last week. Many of my jobs have seen double and triple, almost triple digits across the board of applicants comparatively.
Interesting. Anybody else? Are you kind of tracking your numbers? About the same?
Ours, I think for our support staff, outside of our engineering, our support staff definitely double, triple. It's just been insane. It was like when the whole thing started with COVID, it was like, okay, a little bit, then all of a sudden, boom, it kind of happened, and it was like, okay, we got a lot of applicants. We're also on a hiring freeze, so we just can't do anything with it right now. But again, it's feeding the pipeline.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of emails that are, they're digging around because we were in a hiring freeze too. So there's no recs for them to go and apply, and they find an Ask HR tiny little button at the very bottom that actually goes right to me. And it's, hey, I saw this job that was posted 3 months ago. Is that still available? It's like, well, obviously not, guys. It's not posted. But, I've gotten at least 10 messages of those in the past week. So, there's candidates out there who are really looking for new roles and new opportunities. which I think is a good segue to Andrew's question. What do you think, Sean?
What's Andrew's question?
It said, what are some career paths when you start off as an agency recruiter? Do you guys have outside opportunities presented to you that are outside of recruiting? And does recruiting or account management experience count as B2B experience?
That's the B2B part. I don't know about that. If we're trying to get into the recruiting, I don't know if that matters that much. Although I guess if you have done account management, it comes into play with that hiring management, but that core recruiting agency experience, I think that's, 85% of a corporate recruiting position to being able to recruit. But I do see a lot of staffing agency recruiters trying to get into corporate, and it's just a straight shot as a recruiter. You'll get in, as I'm sure we all know, and there's a lot of contract recruiters in recruiting, right? Some are FTEs, some are contract, usually the budget, headcount reasons are behind that. So I'll see they take on a contract position as a recruiter. And then typically, not all the time though, and this is probably just a personal decision, some people like being on contract because you can typically get a higher hourly rate. But if you want the benefits, health benefits and what have you, and the long-term benefits, you try and get into that FTE position within the company. So if I'm a staffing agency recruiter, and full disclosure, the groups that we're starting, I try and keep, for the most part, staffing agencies out and headhunters out. Although there's a couple of people who I know are third-party recruiters trying to get in corporate, so they're in here. But for the most part, we're all corporate recruiters. I'd say about 99%. But to his question, I'd be connecting to all the recruiting people at a company that I want to go work at and getting that inside connect from recruiter to recruiter. That's how I would be doing it. Because if you are a good recruiter, you're going to know the recruiters at those companies. You're going to be able to get in. If I'm recruiting a recruiter and I'm just processing applicants, well, I'd want you to be able to connect with me and get inside the back door, so to speak, in some way. So yeah, to me, go from a staffing agency, I'd go for a contract FTE, or I'm sorry, a recruiting FTE, or at that contract. The one thing I do tell, like I'm an operations guy, right? So I've managed our contingent workforce programs before at a couple of places. If you're young or you're trying to get into a company, I would try my hardest to find out what staffing agencies that company uses, and then get your resume into those staffing agencies, because that's another direct inlet to that company. Especially for recruiting, because recruiting uses contract recruiters so much, and you can kind of talk with recruiters. So another thing for young people, going back to my topic of candidates knowing it's a competition, there's more than one way to get into a company, and staffing agencies will sell you in if you're good. So that's having a main proponent in there. So I always say, call their recruiters, ask who their staffing agencies that they use, go get your resume in with them, tell them your preferred companies. But that's something I would recommend that person is to do it. Now, with that said, no, and I don't mean to insult anybody, but if you're a recruiter and you need to find a staffing agency to find you a recruiter, that's the wrong way to go. You're going to find people on your own, put them on the W-2 payroll, right? Your preferred payrolling service. But it happens. But shame on you if you do that. So that's how I would look at it. Anybody, any other comments on that position trying to get in recruiting? We do have a session, I think it's next week, where I think it's called 5 Things New Recruiters Should Know About Recruiting. So that'll probably go a little bit deeper into that area. Did we cover all the questions, Beth? I think or Heather, did we get those?
As far as I saw, yes.
Yeah. All right, we're about 15 minutes over. Did anybody have any last comments? No? Well, thanks again, everybody, for participating. I thought that was a really good conversation, get into some deeper areas that I thought we'd get to, but that was in a good way. So much appreciation to everybody. And with that, we will call it a day. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.